Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our October 30th. Sorry, I'm right at my glasses, so I can't see your faces or your names. October 30th workshop. We have a few announcements and then a bit of board business. And the primary subject of our meeting tonight is continuing discussion on Chapter 100 short-term rentals. We'll be joined by the village attorney. I see that he's here with us for that discussion. So first announcements, we are at our combined water supply. We are at 67.12%. So we are dropping levels. Matt, the water superintendent, feels that without a significant amount of water, we'll be at 60% by the end of the week, and we'll need to drop into stage 2. So to remind people, please, I've seen folks washing cars periodically. Please don't wash cars right now. Please don't wash buildings. No gardening. You're limited to between the hours of 7 and 8 and 8 and 9 for watering. At this point, everything's starting to get fall-like. But please do everything you can to conserve water. And if you have any concerns about leaks, please call the plumber in. Also, on the climate collapse front, we have from the county executive a burn ban. Laura has got it pulled up in front of her. So I'm going to have her draw out the important elements of that burn ban.
Yep. So again, that's also, it's due to the drought, the dry conditions. So actions include burning any combustible material in an outdoor area. And if a person violates this order, oh, okay, well, don't do that because it can start fire. But some specifics on that. All outdoor burning of yard trash, household paper products, bonfires, campfires, warming fires, outdoor fires and chimneys, and cooking fires is prohibited unless authorized by state DEC, or cooking of food exclusively in a contained gas or charcoal grill. So don't light a fire outside, is the general gist of this. And the enforcement will be through the local volunteer fire companies that will be notified to respond, and then law enforcement. So we all need to pitch in to make sure that we stay safe from wildfires.
Thank you. Okay, opportunity to request to vote to add or modify an agenda. I would just like to move up to the top the discussion of the roadways and facilities hire and the shade sale, so that we can hear from Bugsy and he can be released for the evening. I'd make a motion to do that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anything else?
I'd make a motion to table the boiler replacement at Village Hall, just so we can get a little more information on the bids to get complete quotes with actual equipment information.
I think we have some additional information. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I vote no.
I'm prepared to vote.
Yeah, I'm prepared to vote.
I'm prepared to vote.
I am
prepared to vote.
prepared. I am
Please.
prepared.
So,
Yes,
so the motion is to table it. I have voted no. Laura has voted no. Aaron has voted yes.
I voted no.
Didn't you vote no?
I voted no.
You seconded.
You seconded the motion, but you were voting no. Sorry.
Yes, I voted no as well.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. We'll have a discussion. And if we feel after discussion that we need to modify, we can. Okay. So moving first to shade sale. So the 501c3 that operates the Top Park, not operates, but mines the Top Park and does maintenance, etc., does fundraising, would like to put a shade sale at the northwest corner where there isn't any tree shade. I did talk with with someone from the group today, and I've asked them to provide specs to Bugsy. So obviously once it comes into Village Park, it's ours to deal with. They will assist with the maintenance, but we need to make sure that installed properly for liability, et cetera. So she's gonna meet with Bugsy. I know that she has provided the specs. Is there any other, we have Bugsy on the call now. Are there any concerns that you would like to raise or trustees you would like Bugsy to raise when he meets with Alex from Tots Park?
I have a question, just a technical question about the shade itself. Is it one of those shades that you put out at a certain, for a certain season and then retracted, or is it out all the time?
It looks to be, from what she sent this evening to Bugsy and to me, it looks to be, like at Haldane, the shades go out in the sunny season and then come back in for the winter.
That makes sense.
I don't know how the material compares to what's installed at Haldane.
Mhm.
It's a commercial product. That's one of the things that we need to look at is the material.
I'll note that the proposal does say they plan to take it down from November to April.
That's right, it does.
I guess just the question of, we plan to take it down, to confirm from the group, if that means that they will
Yeah.
do it, or if our crew has to do it.
That's why I asked, yeah, so I mean, in my subsequent phone call with her, she did say they plan to do it. But, we also have to be mindful that folks are volunteers and there's the possibility that it could fall back on our team. So she and Bugsy will talk and then we'll get a recommendation from him.
But
She said you can come into another session too.
I
Sorry,
mean,
go ahead.
no, I just really like the idea. It's too hot. So, shade's important. I appreciate that they're putting this forward.
And the cost of the shade is donated, the cost of the footings is donated. I can see that in the proposal, so that
Yeah,
looks good.
and they have, just as a reminder, the Top Park organization is a 501c3 that does fundraising. They have their own account balance and that's what they'd be drawing down from. And Aaron is correct, there's the contractor who would be donating labor and materials for footings should the project proceed. Okay, so we'll put this on. Bugsy, do you think that you would be able to speak with her before next week, or do you need some more time? You with us?
He's on mute.
We got it.
Bugsy,
I should be able, yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. I should be able to meet with her before next week's meeting.
Okay, so we'll put it on the agenda under rec for next week and then
Oh.
see how you do.
Okay, quick question. The Haldane School has one of these already in place?
Yes, a very large one over the playground by the blacktop. They're not talking about anything quite that large, but you get a sense.
Yeah,
That is-
no, I've never seen one before, so I'll go up to the school, take a look at that. Talk to Adam McNeil and we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Bugs.
You're welcome.
Okay, do you want to make your recommendation for hire? I'm so pleased that you were able to find a candidate quickly.
Yes, I found a gentleman, Anthony Winters. He's got a little bit of experience in a lot of things we do. Very genuinely nice guy, great upbeat attitude. I think he'd make a perfect fit for the village, and I'd like to recommend we hire him.
Okay, any questions from trustees?
Betsy, did you make reference calls, or is someone else making reference calls?
We do a background check. We run their license.
Very good.
Okay, and everything comes out good, no red flags?
No, none that I saw.
And I think you said he's local, right?
Correct. He lives up in
Close to
Nelsonville.
village. Yeah, so there's
That's
someone
good.
nearby for plowing, which is a good thing, nearer than you in any case. So would someone like to make a motion?
I make a motion to, for the hire of Anthony Winters, for the roadways and facilities crew.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so Bugsy, let's get him his packet and get him in.
Just, when we've done this before, we've mentioned the salary as well.
22, it's 20, thank you, Aaron, 22, 20 an hour. He does not have a CDL. Thank you for that. People want to do CDL. Okay, so the next item is just clarification. When Michelle was doing payroll for the MOAs, she was concerned that it did not specify that the officers who've done details in August and September were should be included in that MOA and paid at that rate. So this resolution clarifies it. Any questions or discussion before we move it?
Well, it seems pretty, fair to just do the back pay to make sure that they're paid for what we had discussed with them and what they're expecting.
Okay, would you like to read the resolution?
Sure, thank you, a second. Right, I'll make a motion to move resolution of the village board of,
Read a number?
is this the right one?
Yeah, this should be 35-2024.
Thank you.
35, resolution number 35 of 2024. The Village of Cold Spring correcting and ratifying police officer payment for commercial details and related tours off-duty worked during the pilot program. Whereas the village and the PBA agreed to a memorandum of agreement dated August 28th, 2024, which created a pilot program pursuant to which applicants seeking to hold special events in the village would cover certain costs associated with police coverage for commercial details. And whereas the village and the PBA approved an addendum to the MOA dated September 25th, 2024, clarifying which tours of duty would be classified as commercial details and the applicable officer rates of pay for the commercial details and related tours of duty. And whereas several officers worked commercial details and related tours of duty after the execution of the August MOA, but before September's MOA. And whereas the village staff administering payroll have requested clarification regarding the start date of said terms of the commercial details and related tours in August and September. And whereas it was the party's intention to have those officers paid at the pilot event rate of pay. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved that the officers who worked the August and September 2024 commercial details and related tours set forth above are entitled to the commercial detail rate of pay, and the village accountant is authorized to process and make the payments of the commercial detail rate and to compensate or correct any prior payment made to the police officers pursuant of the MOAs.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Oh,
Aye.
By roll call.
Roll call vote.
Yep.
Trustee Starbuck,
Aye.
trustee Bozzi,
Aye.
trustee Primor,
Aye.
Mayor Foley,
Aye.
trustee Phillips Woods.
Aye.
You.
The ayes have it.
I'll have what she needs in the file. I'm gonna, obviously, we've gone past boiler, I'll come back to that. So the next one is application for street opening and water line repair. This is part of, thank you to the clerk for cleaning up standard operating practice. So this is for a repair on a residential line at 12 Mountain Avenue. We have an application to make that repair to the service line to the house. The highway superintendent, I'm sorry, the roadways and facilities crew chief signs off on the street opening itself, and we as the water board sign off on the repair. Any discussion? Matt's, I would just read into record Matt's recommendation. Yep, the proposed replacement of the 3/4-inch residential water service line has been reviewed and the work plan is compliant with our code requirements. It is recommended at this time to permit Pizzella Brothers to be the residential contractor for the water service line repair at 12 Mountain Avenue. Pizzella Brothers are qualified to perform this work and have done similar work for residents within the village as well as for the village of Cold Spring, and the result has always been satisfactory. So we are being asked to take his recommendation. Any discussion? Nope. Okay, I would make a motion then to approve the service line replacement at 12 Mountain Avenue.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks.
Aye.
Thanks. Okay, and then come back to the boiler replacement. So what we have in the basement right now is, I think, a 300-gallon oil tank and a very old boiler, which we have been given warnings about from, remind me, the inspecting unit.
The New York State Department of Energy, I think it was. I'd have to grab his card, but New York State came in and did a evaluation. We also had inspector come from our insurance company. To it's Hartford Steam Boiler, come in and do an evaluation, and both gave the same recommendation that it needed to be replaced.
Yeah, it's needed to be replaced for a few years, and we were hoping, Laura and I have been working with the architect, had been hoping to go sooner to heat pumps. But that's complicated for lots of reasons in this building, including figuring out insulation, et cetera. And so we can't make it through the winter with the boiler we have. So we have 3 bids for a boiler itself. One from Downey, one from now I've been trying to get the other one.
Weber.
T. Weber. For the units, the Downey boiler is significantly less expensive. I did have Carrie pull the spec sheet for us today. What Carrie recommended that the others did not, and I think is very smart, is shifting to a separate hot water heater. Right now, we boil the entire, the boiler is turning on every time people are turning hot water, because it's a direct connection from the boiler to the sinks. Why the water is
So there's
nuclear.
Very
There's
old
no
fashioned.
There's no.
There's no tank. That's right. So we're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week,
Even
52
in the
weeks of the
summer.
year, even in the summer, burning oil to heat water for 3 sinks. So that's very smart. And while it's disappointing not to go to heat pumps yet, this will get us through to being able to get the heat pump, and the DASNY grant will cover the purchase. We've already confirmed that with DASNY, that we can use the fund in that way. So, discussion.
Does the Downey quote does not mention water tank?
On this, there are 2, there's the 8,200 and the 9,500. The 9,500, we will install a new electric water heater for domestic hot water. And I followed up to confirm that that's an A.O. Smith electric 30-gallon hot water heater. The cost is $1,300, and we'll use about $20 of fuel per month for the hand washing and cleaning in the building. Leslie had asked about on-demand hot water heaters, which I think would be ideal as well. Unfortunately, they run on natural gas, and we can't A, we don't have a line, and B, we don't have room or capacity to come to code to put another tank in the basement. So that rules out on demand, unfortunately. Eliza did raise a hot water heat pump. It's certainly possible. It's about double the cost of a standard heat pump.
Standard hot water.
Standard hot water heater. And it's, to me, it seems like it makes sense to do that as part of when we shift to heat pumps overall.
When do we think we'll do that?
After we do an electric upgrade in Village Hall.
Yeah, first we have to do an electrical upgrade before we can shift to that. So
We
it'll be a while.
also have to do the weatherization of the buildings. We have to improve the energy efficiency of the building so that the heat pumps are sized
Right.
correctly. To do it in a really
This
leaky
is-
building doesn't make sense. So it's like, unfortunately, and doing those 2 steps in this old building that has a lot of other problems is frustratingly slow. So I I am there with the, I wish this were happening faster, and I'm not thrilled that we're approving an oil tank or an oil heater, but we can't get there fast enough. And thankfully, we're at least replacing with the same thing. It's not like we're then investing in bringing a natural gas system here or something like that.
Well, and we're burning oil like crazy right now.
I'm glad also to see that the water heater is at least an electric one.
Yeah.
And we use so little water. We're not even heating water for showers or anything here. It's just hand washing. So I think it's not a big, the efficiency gain with something like a heat pump hot water heater. isn't huge, given like our small usage. So I appreciate the questions. I'm like
For
glad
sure.
that you dug on it, but, I feel okay with this as our kind of bridge solution as we really try to use our NYSERDA money for the better upgrades here.
So one thing I note about this is that as you've noted, the water heater, the water heater is electric on the Downey quote, right? Which I assume then it's not hybrid, it's not connected to the boiler, the oil fed boiler. Right?
Correct.
It'll be standalone.
Correct.
But we also need electric updates in the building.
Yeah,
So-
that's not gonna happen anytime soon, though. That's, sorry, go ahead.
Just trying to finish.
Yep, sorry.
If the $9,500 option is what we're looking for, because that's the Downey one with a tank, the other one I think doesn't have a tank, if I'm understanding his quote right. If we do need electric updates, because it's gonna be, it's gonna be a bunch of amps needed for a hot water heater, if it's actually gonna get hot. This does say we'll do all necessary wiring for installation of the boiler. Have they scoped this out and we have the electric panels needed? I mean, the
Yes.
spots needed in the
Yep.
legal box?
The larger electrical upgrade that Laura is talking about is a much bigger full building question. There's a lot of very outdated wiring in the building, and that's one of the things has slowed us down as we've been trying to get toward heat pumps is dealing with the electrical system. But this is an isolated location where a panel addition can be made, et cetera. Bugsy, did you want to add anything to that question about electric? Is he still with us? Or did he go? Oh, that's fine. That's gonna come up.
And what was the boiler that was, the electric water heater that was recommended?
It is
The model? Is it this Peerless?
A.O. Smith. No, this is the boiler.
Okay.
That's the boiler, and the the electric water heater is A.O. Smith. It's pretty standard brand.
I don't have that first one, so. I don't know.
So that's what I got later in the day, because you asked about it, and I sent it. So, any other questions or discussion?
Yeah, just to be clear, which one is the recommendation? Because it's a little,
It's the $9,500
Right,
for
that's what I
the
thought.
Peerless boiler and the A.O. Smith electrical hot water heater.
okay, that's good. Okay, I'll just note it's a little bit of an unusual quote because it doesn't say if there's money in advance or anything like that, for the contract, but maybe that's.
No, it's not for this.
We never pay money in advance for anything.
Okay,
That's
That's
a
general municipal law.
okay, good policy. Wish
It's
I
a
could do the
state
same at
law,
home.
actually, yeah.
Good.
Okay, so would someone like to make a motion?
I make a motion to approve the quote from Downey Energy for the replacement boiler and electric hot water heater
In the amount of,
in the amount of $9,500.
second,
Second,
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Opposed? Abstaining.
Yeah. Didn't have time to review it before.
Can I have, sorry, I have a question about timing. So, I know you said something about being before Thanksgiving. Is that,
Yeah, he said within 2 weeks.
oh, within 2 weeks, okay.
It's due to
Oh,
be
yeah.
8 tomorrow, so
Yeah,
hopefully it won't get cold.
Yeah.
Or then, although I could use some
Although,
actual fall weather.
Hopefully it gets cold.
Okay. And thank you, I know Bugsy's not on right now, but thank you for his help with that. Okay, so now, we put everything on the agenda, right? Yeah, except for short-term rentals. Oh, and minutes, let's knock the minutes out of the way, so that's done. Any discussion of the minutes of 10/23?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of 10/23/24. Thank you to the clerk for getting them out so quickly.
Second,
second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oops,
Aye.
is that a nod? Okay, great, okay, now, thank you for waiting for us, John, while we went through all of the other items. So I think we also have Jen, is Jennifer Jens Warwick? I think Jennifer is Jens Warwick. She's she's coughing a lot, so she's gonna keep herself muted.
Okay.
But Jen, feel free to
Yeah.
hop in if
Sorry,
you,
Kathleen. Yeah, it's me. I am losing my voice and I am sick, so I am just here mostly to listen and I'll chime in when I can, if you can understand me, and I'll keep myself muted otherwise.
you are a trooper. Okay, so there was an initial discussion, revisiting, coming back to the update of chapter 100. I want to recognize Eliza, for getting us all back on track with where we left off, and making sure we were starting at the right point again. And to Jen for, sort of shuttling us through the process from her wearing her hat as the ad hoc committee chair for short-term rentals. She has posed several questions to the village attorney, some of which are still being researched, I believe. And I asked John, one of you, I'm sorry that I can't remember from the video, one of you raised the question of, well, why don't we combine this? If we're worried about concordance with, I don't know if you had a copy of that. If we're concerned about concordance with 134, why not just make it part of? Why not just make short-term rentals part of 134? So I wanted to talk through that with you because I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so one of the disadvantages to including it in the zoning chapter could be the fact that existing short-term rentals could still claim some type of grandfathered status.
Mhm.
If it's outside the zoning chapter, then there's no grandfathered protections, essentially.
Even those operating without permits?
Yeah, so I guess if you've
Well,
been
that's a
operating
big
before the existing law, you know, your grandfather. If you've been operating since the existing law without a permit, then you're a pre-existing illegal nonconformity, so you don't have the grandfather protections.
Okay, okay.
John, so this is like other building, you know, all of our old houses that predate zoning code are pre-existing non-conforming and only need to come into compliance when they seek another change. So you're saying that it's basically the
Oh,
same.
I think you cut out for a second, but yeah, they only need to come into compliance when they make a change, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is.
So I
sort of
was looking through a
parallel.
bunch of different codes,
Interesting.
and it actually looks like a lot of municipalities create the short-term rental law as a separate chapter. I
Okay,
would say probably 3 out of 4.
okay. So as we have been proceeding,
Mm-hmm.
and it probably sounds like for that reason you've just stated, it makes sense to do so.
I think so. So that's why we did it in Cornwall and Hudson.
Okay. I had understood there to be an expedience, driving the separation of the two, but you know, not waiting for the zoning chapter to be done when this was first being drafted, whatever it was,
I think that was
2019,
another,
2020.
yeah,
But what you're saying makes sense.
yeah, but I think your reason too was, I think, another reason why they carved it out.
Yep, makes sense.
This is Jen here. Just one question. I think at our last meeting, we were talking about the appeals process. And that's when the zoning board thing came up, I think, for the most part, like the correct body to hear appeals.
So
Um,
that's a good point, because normally the zoning board can only hear appeals under the zoning chapter. You could
Unless
be,
they're cross-referenced, right?
excuse me?
Unless they're cross-referenced,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
the
So you
last
could,
chapter is.
you could put in language that says the zoning board can hear any interpretations or appeals. A lot of the floodplain chapters, floodplain regulations, they all cross-reference the zoning board. So they give the zoning board jurisdiction in that chapter.
Got it.
If it's not specifically noted, then the zoning board has no jurisdiction unless it's the zoning chapter. So you can put that in. You could also, you can still have a permit process set forth in a separate chapter. You can, I just looking at the town of Monroe's, they have a separate chapter that, in that situation, it's the town board that looks at the criteria as to whether to grant the short-term permit or not. Now, you can make it the planning board, you can make it the zoning board. You know, it doesn't have to be the village board. I don't like the town board making decisions, and it was very political in our experience, so. I would recommend the planning board or zoning board if you're gonna go with a discretionary permit route.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think you want a quasi judicial board making
Correct.
those decisions, and you want the appeal availability of Article 78.
Right, and you can give them, you can give them the criteria in the chapter, in the code, what are they looking at? Because again, if it's outside the zoning chapter, it's not a variance, you're not looking at those 5 factors. It's technically not a special use permit, so you're not really looking at those type of factors, but we can create our own factors. And a lot of it overlaps, but you get the sense, as long as it's in the code, then whoever reviews that permit will have criteria. And the applicant knows too.
What would be decisions that would bounce if there needed to be an appeal? You get declined for a permit, or what else? What else would there
Yeah,
be?
so it depends. So I guess if you're just gonna have the building inspector issue all the, review the applications and issue the permits or not issue the permits, then yeah, I think you would want language that any appeals would go to the ZBA.
Would an appeal of what about a fine or a violation? Do we have some kind of,
That goes to the court.
that goes to the court, so it's
That could
just
go to the
about-
courts now, there's town of Cornwall has a process where if you're appealing a fine or imposing a fine, you actually go through the town board. And you have a public hearing before the town board. So that's an option, or you can just go straight to the courts. Whoop.
Which is the way we set it up in the last draft,
Right.
but I think what we're talking about right now, I think Eliza addresses some of the concern that you had about there being a non-court appeal process for things like permit denials. Yeah,
Right, things that are not.
Yeah, so that way, if you're going from the building department's determination, you don't have to go straight to the courts, that you can go to the zoning board if you guys want to bake that in there. That's a
but
good
if
idea.
you violated the ordinance and have been fined, and you want to appeal a fine, that's through the courts.
Yeah, I mean, yes, so. Correct, it would be most likely the justice court.
Right, okay.
But I'm saying you could have a process where you could appeal to the village board. I've
Yeah.
seen that in the town of Cornwall. But again, and then it gets very political, so.
I think that's a disaster, actually. I don't know,
Yeah.
what thoughts on that? No, okay.
I'll skip that day.
Are there other questions for John on that topic?
John or Jen, do you have examples of criteria for appeals from other places?
Well, so the criteria for a permit, I can give you examples for that.
Yeah,
So whether it's the building inspector or the planning board or zoning board, I can give you examples. It's like I said, in the town of Monroe, they have good criteria, but the town board didn't necessarily follow it, but that was just my experience.
There for a determination by the ZBA?
no, well, I mean, last time we were talking about if there was an appeal, at this point, the language just says, if there's an appeal, go to the village board and plead your case, essentially. And so I think at the meeting, we decided, one, it shouldn't be the village board, but
Yeah.
two, like, on what criteria would you evaluate an appeal? And in the ZBA, there are variances and there's a balancing factor. I think we need to, I thought what John was saying was agreeing that we needed that criteria. And like one example that we talked about last time was, say there was a split. Can't even remember. I guess we
Shared
landed on
driveway?
no, it's not allowed for a shared driveway, and so you wouldn't get a permit. So then you could appeal that And so then would there be some kind of balancing of, well, in this circumstance, the shared driveway is actually 100 feet wide and never, like.
In the same process.
And so then the impacts on the neighbors, giving some kind of way to evaluate.
So it's not
that
arbitrary.
case, so that it's not arbitrary and there's, yes.
Right, no, that's a good point. So now I understand what you're saying. So yeah, I'm trying to look. I'm pretty sure I'm looking at some of the floodplain laws. And where you do have to go to the ZBA, and I think they have a specific criteria for the ZBA. Whether, and how to review that building inspector's original determination. So I will provide you guys one of the standard floodplain chapters. Do you guys have one, right?
We do, but I haven't worked with it. I'm not as familiar with it. I don't know if others are. Darren, did you have a question?
I thought we worked on it way back when.
That was the previous board.
Yeah.
So I do have a question that I remember something, I'm not remembering the specifics. There are other chapters in the code where the appeal process is through the village board. Not remembering exactly where, maybe somebody else can remember, but it doesn't seem to be too unusual.
It is unusual. The tree chapter. Trying to visualize the list in my head. Tree chapter is one of them. Dangerous building is code enforcement. Do you have a better answer, John, than what I'm thinking of? Right now, I can't think of anything but trees where the appeal goes to the village board.
Off the top of my head.
Removal of garbage, like if someone has a lot that is
Right.
it's deemed a nuisance, that appeal process is through the village board too.
Yeah, I would imagine it's probably in the non-land use context where
Yeah.
that comes up.
Right.
What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking, how often is this gonna happen? And I do appreciate, part of our job is to anticipate different contingencies and to plan for that. But I also am aware, the intentions of this, and I watched the video of the meeting, and I just wonder, we've had a process in place and a permitting process in place, and I believe only 2 places have applied, right? 2 permits have been issued. I don't know how many have applied.
5 applied.
5 applied.
And part of it is because it was, it's so labyrinthine. It was hard for people to apply. And more problematic is that its enforcement was empowered to the wrong body, to the
Okay.
police department rather than to code enforcement. That's the code we inherited. We have done one draft as a team with Jen, and are now, we set it aside to do zoning, et cetera, parking in the meantime. Now we're coming back to it and saying, all right, let's finish that job.
Yes. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And this is relevant to appeals process because we have to be receiving applications in order to reject them, in order to have an appeals process. But what I'm not really clear about this whole process, which we can have this as a different conversation, I understand it's a little tangential. What's in what we're changing to make more people apply?
Well, the idea that it's enforceable. It was not enforceable before. And before, in the previous chapter 100, and the enforcement was only empowered to the police department. This is a civil issue, not a criminal issue. So the police department, they were not consulted when they were empowered to enforce this law. And their feeling is it's a really bad look for us to be pursuing, and B, it's a civil matter. It's not for us. It's for the quasi judicial bodies and the judicial bodies to deal with. So knowing that it was very difficult to enforce, there was really not much motivation to apply. And it wasn't because we knew that it would be difficult and could be challenged easily, we didn't pursue.
Right.
So there wasn't a great deal of marketing around it. There wasn't, the process wasn't full and marketed in the way that we've done other new processes.
Well, I think, and if I can contribute here, Colleen, I also you know, we had several short-term rental operators on the ad hoc committee. So it was sort of like taking a temperature of that sort of thing. And it seemed like, and I can tell you that just from people talking to me in the village, it's a little bit too, it's way too hard, you know, the burden is way too hard to apply. There's a lot of roadblocks in place that encourage people to just not participate in the permitting process. And that's like one of the main goals of the ad hoc committee was try and simplify everything and make it more fair. So you're not singling out short-term rental operators as bad people or something. It's like all these people are trying to do something as long as they're, you know, village residents and they're, you know, they're just running these small businesses. They're not like meaning to, I don't know, to be illegal or something, but to try and welcome them in with a much simpler process. That's like the whole point of this. And I think something that we got stuck on last meeting, Aaron, that you missed was which I think I talked to Kathleen about, is the excuse me, the inspections process is basically one of the biggest roadblocks. And it's for the one-time short-term rental permits we talked about last meeting, and also for the, you know, the hosted short-term rental permits. And so that's like a topic we need to write down to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah.
At a future date.
And Jen, I did listen to every word of the, of that meeting. So
Multiple hours.
yes, I can appreciate that your voice is still gone from that. Okay, now that's helpful. And I think it's worthy to keep in mind for other parts of the conversation, just my view listening to it as somebody who didn't participate in the first time this was discussed earlier, but that the goals of this code will only really happen if people apply for permits, right? And we make it lower barrier of entry, as Jen said, right, to doing that.
Agreed. And that there is enforcement once the new law is in place. I have asked to sit down with, as you know, we combined our team with the Phillipstown. Phillipstown now does our code enforcement. And they have hired an additional half-time inspector. So now they have 2 clerks, Greg, and a half-time person. They're splitting with Putnam Valley. So that expands capacity. However, these initial inspections are sort of most parallel to commercial fire inspections, which the village, without that additional person, has not kept up with in the way that we should have. So one of the ideas, maybe I thought it was a trustee, but maybe it was Jen who put it forward, was if you were to inspect upon the first application, but not require every year. And then after that, you know, after that first year, the liability is on the business owner, right? You need to make sure once we've confirmed that the space is habitable and it's got fire egress and fire extinguishers and all of that, the liability is on the property owner to stay in compliance.
I thought we did that for the once a year.
Did you land on that? It wasn't clear to me that you landed on that.
Ask others that were there, but my memory was that it was for the once a year, and that it was still the every time you reapply for the
Oh, I guess I
hosted,
misunderstand.
you know.
In my understanding of the discussion, we were talking about the hosted, and it seemed like it got slipped in that it was for everything at the end, but I didn't
Okay, so
agree with that.
let's clarify
so-
on it now, because I think Jen, do you feel like you have enough voice to talk through what
Well-
you were thinking about that?
This is just an idea, and I mean, maybe John will have a different take on this, but yeah, in our last meeting, everybody seemed comfortable with it with that idea for the one-time permit. So it's like a clearinghouse, basically. Once your house is cleared, you can apply for that one-time permit for West Point graduation weekend or whatever, you know, over and over again, and it makes it much easier. It's also really, you know, makes the burden on our staff and on the building inspector, et cetera, much easier. But what if you considered that for, excuse me, for the hosted permits? That would just, I mean, Laura, we talked about it last time about an annual renewal, and the interest of the village in that is safety, I think that's the main concern, right? But that's if you're treating these businesses like hotels. But if you're looking at it more like these are kind of like businesses that are operating in spaces that otherwise would be year-round rentals in some cases, or renting a apartment or renting a room. And you see, if you think about the burden that people who rent to a year-round renter have, they don't have to every year submit to an inspection, right? So maybe, I'm just throwing this out there, but I am very pro regulating short-term rentals, but I'm also pro just making it much less burdensome for everyone. It doesn't seem like, what is the benefit of an annual inspection on the part of the village? If we could have a clearinghouse where all the local short-term rentals that we know have been inspected, are safe, have fire extinguishers, whatever, have all the means of egress. If they're there and their space that they're renting is inspected, why do we need to do it every single year? What's the benefit of that? That's all. I mean, maybe that's an ignorant point, but it seemed like that would really help.
I don't think it's ignorant at all. I mean, for comparison, I have a rental property that's a long-term rental, right? For years at a time, I rent it. I get inspected every 3 years for that. But that's in a city with a much greater capacity and a larger building department.
Right.
Right? So it's manageable for them.
Right.
I think going to annual it's hard for us already to do the annual inspections we have. So I want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up to fail on that point. And John, is there anything that drives the repetition of inspections from a legal perspective? Like, does it have to be any period of time in particular?
No, I mean, so I think it's certainly key to have an inspection as part of the original permit process. If you want the permit inspections to continue after that, it's up to the board, but there's no legal reason to do it other than to be belt and suspenders and I guess have the opportunity for fees. But if you don't have the staff to do the inspections, then what's the point? Honestly, if you know, if there's ever a complaint or an issue that comes up, you know, then that's a different story. The inspector always
Right.
has to investigate complaints. So, you know, so there's always that opportunity without having an annual inspection.
I thought, just to clarify, I don't know that we ever talked about annual. I thought it was upon, the next time the person has to apply for the application, for the permit, rather.
I'm pretty sure the draft says annually.
What
Well,
chapter is inspections?
when we discussed it last time at that meeting, I never understood it as talking about an annual inspection. I always understood it as the next time the person would have to apply for a permit.
No, Tweeps, I think that's right. So it would be every 2 years because
Right.
the permits last 2 years.
Okay. I mean, I think we can discuss the timing, but
Section.
Oh, what section?
Yeah, because I'm looking at the online version with the red
Let me
lines,
find it.
and it doesn't show up.
Verification 100 point. Are you looking for the draft or the draft was emailed? It's not going to be on the website. Hang on, I'm looking for it.
Not the website, on the SharePoint, on the.
Oh, where is it on this?
It should be in the Teams, the OneDrive, so.
Yeah.
Is it
The one
email her?
But if we can
Control F
find
for
them.
fire.
Jen,
I looked under inspection, I didn't find anything.
Jen, can you,
I can't hear you. I don't know what the question is.
so we're trying to find the reference to,
Oh,
inspections within the code itself.
it's not, it's in section 5 or 6 that the village clerk is working on. So it's in that draft it's not in the
Yeah,
red
yeah.
line.
Draft.
Excuse me.
Oh, not in the red line.
Separate email.
That's right. Okay,
Part of
sorry.
the permits,
A
yeah.
lot of different copies.
So the permitting process and the is not in that because it's being composed
That's
right
right.
Part of the
I got
permitting
it.
process.
Yep, So Aaron, I think I have 2 copies of it. So Jen sent to Greg shared with all of us, and should be in the SharePoint, a document with a draft portion, permit application procedure for short-term rentals, right? That's in the SharePoint, right?
That's
Actually,
right.
it's in everything else. I
And
didn't look at
Aaron,
it.
the reason that's not in this draft is because this draft is the draft that well, originally it was the draft that the ad hoc short-term rental committee produced as a suggestion. And they did not feel that they could suggest those sections because it has to do with staff and internal processes, basically. It wasn't something for the citizens to weigh in on, basically.
Thanks.
Excuse me.
If after annual permit, oh no, that's the waitlist procedure. Hang on. For permit renewals only.
Sorry to take up people's time.
No, it's fine. It's something we have to talk about. It's not jumping out at me. Proof of liability insurance. Okay, once application is verified as complete, the village will schedule an inspection by code enforcement officer prior to the issuance of any permit. The permit owner shall give reasonable access for inspections to be conducted to ensure compliance with the provisions of the Village of Cold Spring Code and the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. And then there's a note, consider whether we want to allow the applicant to submit an independent, no, that's different. That's a different question altogether. So right now, it doesn't say annual. You are right. I think you are right that it is on renewal, right?
Yes, that's what we discussed.
So I'm in favor of Jen's proposal, which is, I don't know if you proposed it formally, but,
An initial inspection.
an initial inspection that on permit renewal does not have to be re-inspected, that it's a one-time ask or requirement from the building inspector and of the homeowner.
And another way to think about it is that whoever said it, John, if there's a complaint, code enforcement will be called in. But also if there's construction, say someone's operating a short-term rental and they decide that they're gonna put a deck on it, they need to get a building permit anyway, right? So there's gonna be an eye, the inspector's gonna be focused on the application, but there will be an eye on the property. So there's not going to be work going on that doesn't require a permit. If I'm saying that well.
Changes.
Yeah. I mean, major changes that aren't gonna.
And the idea would be that the renewal, if you renew your permit, meaning like on time and you're in good standing and you renew it, then you wouldn't have to submit to another inspection for as long as you're renewing it in good standing. But if you fall off the face of the earth and your permit's expired and you come back 10 years later, you're probably going to, we have to have language like you probably have to get inspected again at that point, right? It's just, the idea is, I think it's in everyone's interest to encourage people who are responsibly doing these short-term rentals to continue, because that means they're good neighbors. That means they're fitting in. Nobody's complaining, blah, blah, blah. If the system can be built to encourage those people to continue and make it easier for them, that's like a win-win, I think, for the village and for everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll just say personally, I'm not. I have to think about it a little bit more, do a little bit more research. I don't think that yearly is required. Maybe don't think biannually, but maybe every 4 years. I'm just not sure about the idea of once it's done, then never confirming this again. And I hear it that it's like a long-term rental, but they're also sort of like hotels, and people are coming in and out and they're assuming that, that it is permitted and that there's a level of safety. I just want to think about this bit a little bit more. I would be interested in others' perspectives or from the public.
Good question. Does the village inspect our hotels and what frequency?
Yes, they do. The code enforcement officer does. I don't know with what frequency. And the health department does as well, for kitchens, et cetera.
Right.
If they provide food service.
Um,
That's a good comparison to draw.
Right, because it shouldn't be more often than hotels, presumably. Maybe the same frequency or maybe less.
And just because we are, it sounds like because of capacity, we have been behind, that doesn't mean that we should enshrine in our code something that is not where we want to be. And so I don't think I think we should go based on what the code says about the hotels, not what, if
Oh, I
there's
agree,
difference in
I agree
practice.
totally. That's code with code,
Yeah.
but it's not,
Yeah.
yeah. I agree.
And that may be driven not by, I don't think that's driven by us locally, John, that would be driven by state regulation, right? Hotels,
Yes, I mean, there would probably be fire inspections that have to be done. Every year, every couple of years. So that would be driven by the probably state codes.
okay.
I don't think that it's a reasonable comparison to compare hotels with private houses. A hotel might have 20 guests. That's a bigger problem if you have a fire than if you have 3 guests or 8 guests, if that's your max, under one smaller building. I think that requiring one inspection to get your permit and keep it rolling is a reasonable for the scope and the scale. I think that comparing an apple to a bushel of apples is not really fair. So I think, I definitely believe in making sure that they're fire safe and they're meeting code there, but I wouldn't personally feel comfortable supporting multiple inspections throughout the years if someone's been in good standing and continues to renew. And,
And we're not getting complaints.
and we're not getting complaints, right?
Just to be clear, because I think I might have sounded like I said different things. I'm still on board with that inspect once and keep it going until there's a complaint for some reason, as opposed to, but I am curious what the hotel says and don't think under any circumstances we should be inspecting more frequently than we inspect hotels.
So John, you'll find that comparison for us? The frequency, or do you
Yeah, I mean, it might be easier to just ask Greg, your building inspector. He probably knows off the top of his
Probably
head.
cheaper to ask him too.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm always watching out for you guys.
Actually,
Thank you.
you could feel
I
it.
think, I think while John's here, you guys might want to talk about the shared driveway issue again, because that was not
Yes.
resolved last meeting. And I think we asked them to do a little more thinking about it, because it seemed like the tenor of the board, nobody wanted to allow shared driveways to operate, but it seemed like the attorney was advising us that that was not, there was an equity issue with outright prohibiting that. So,
And that was Jonathan, who
yeah,
was
that
with
was-
last time, yeah.
I was not against it, the shared driveways, for the record.
Yeah, and
that's right.
listening to the discussion, I'll say that I also, people who buy houses with shared driveways know that they don't have full ownership of the driveway, right? They bought the house knowing they have to share this resource with their neighbor. And the ones who are prepared might have an agreement with their neighbor. And the ones who are really prepared might have an agreement that say, and then I don't want any short-term rentals over there. And I think all of this is the kind of thing that we need to stay really far away from. And, because this is not just somebody with a short-term rental saying, and I respect that, I don't have a shared driveway, but I know people who do. It's hard. When you're buying a house, you have to consider the loss of total control over your property, because part of it's shared with somebody else. Same if you have an easement to use somebody else's driveway, for example, right? So I think this falls under, you knew you didn't have control when you were buying the house, but you bought the house, so I hope that it's good, and I hope it works well for you. I'm not sure that we have any obligation to make anybody's life more complicated, right? By by weighing in, or even saying you're not allowed to have an STR because we don't want to create more tension. There's already the possibility of tension with a shared driveway. That's not something we're inventing. So I would say include shared driveways in the process and just.
And yeah, I think you're sort of, I appreciate your point. I think you're sort of conflating different issues. There's the issue of if there is, you know, if there is an issue between the two people who share that driveway, that's a sort of separate and apart. I think we were talking about whether that person or those people who have a shared driveway, whether they should be in the pool of applicants at all to have an STR. And as a person who purchased a home with a shared driveway, I fully understand that it is a shared commodity. We have to be civil and work as best as we can. But I didn't purchase a home next to or in future thinking or not, where someone has a business where they have an STR. That wasn't part of my plan, right? So it's fun, you know, I understand that people may decide to do that, and that's great, but that's not necessarily the best situation when you are in a situation where you are sharing a commodity. I think there are other places in the village where they have shared driveways, which are much bigger, and maybe that's where the appeals process comes in, you know. But I think as a person looking to get a permit for an STR with a shared driveway situation, I don't think that's the best. I don't think that's a good idea. And if they want to appeal that, that's fine.
I'd like, you guys asked John to do some research last time. I want us to have the debate, but I want us to have it in an informed way.
Yeah.
John, what were the results of?
Well, we're still working on it, but I haven't really come across many short-term rental laws where they differentiate between shared driveways and not shared driveways. So I think most municipalities have kind of taken a step back and a hands-off approach, and it's a civil matter. It's a private property dispute. You know, municipalities should never really get involved in interpreting easements and private property rights. So I think it would be unusual to exclude owners who have shared driveways from applying for the short-term permit, short-term rental permit. But I mean, you know, so we're still looking into that, but I really haven't come across other municipalities that have that type of regulation or requirement.
Aaron, what were you starting to say?
Well, mostly that I wasn't aware that Tweeps had a shared driveway, and this wasn't pointed at all.
Well, I mean, no, agreed. And this is not about me. I am just saying, since I have this, am I muted? Okay, since I have this unique perspective on this situation, I can share what that is like. And and I was more commenting to your point about, you know, when someone buys something, they know what they're getting into and so on and so forth. But I think, like, you know, STRs are while clearly people have been doing it in the village for a long time, unpermitted, and illegally, you know, it's not something, I don't think most people buy their homes thinking that the person next to them is going to start a business where they have people coming in and out. So, in it.
Do you have a prostitute running next door? Just
No.
kidding, sorry.
I do not.
So the owner, the person on the other side of the shared driveway is on the call as well, so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that, you know, and again, this is not about my personal situation. I'm just talking from a person who's in a shared driveway situation, and there are not many of them, but there are some in the village. There seems to be a lot, for whatever, in my little stretch where I live. And they are all different configurations, and in some configurations it could make more sense, but in certain ones I think it makes very little sense.
So, you know, it is a business, but it's a business that supposed to operate as a single family home. So there could be other ways to address your concerns. You know, you could require a certain amount of parking spaces. You can limit the number of guests per bedroom, which I think you guys have already started talking about, because, you know, short-term rental is essentially supposed to be operating as a single-family home. It's just, you've got a different family, you know, over the course of a month, you know, you may have 3 or 4 different families in there. So there may be other ways to address those concerns, because you know, you don't anticipate cars going up and down your shed driveway. But you know, as long as it's in keeping with the single family home operation, um, you know, control the number of guests, control the number of bedrooms, require off-street parking. I think there are ways to kind of address that, other than saying if you have a shared driveway, then you cannot even apply for a permit. Just,
Well, then that just gets back to also the issue of off-street parking again.
Mhm.
Right? So, I mean, as you know, that's a really fun conversation to have too. And
Generally come to resolution.
Well,
yes, but in this case,
my thinking on that, which we can talk about that too.
Okay, let's put a pin in that one and come back to it and get past. So John, you said you are still researching, but what you have seen to date does not demonstrate a prohibition on shared driveways.
I haven't seen many codes that prohibit shared driveways.
Okay.
Um,
And it sounds like, just to get a sense of where we are, Eliza, it's not something that you're bothered by.
Yeah, I don't think that should be part of our code in this case.
I agree.
Okay. Okay. I'm very torn about it, because
I do not agree, for the
we
record.
have a lot of, Tweets does not agree. We have a lot of very small configurations, and even on a large lot, you know, one of the, it's before our time in office, but there was a pretty ugly conflict on a large property with a shared driveway. So it's not just the little tiny ones where problems happen with, you know, people coming with multiple cars, et cetera. And the real is that the realist, whether it is realistic to be controlling the number of, that we're able to enforce the number of cars that come and the number of the bodies that sleep, I think that becomes problematic. If there were a way to prohibit shared driveways to be eligible, that was lawful, that I would be in favor of that. But I think John would have to find that we're standing on solid ground. If we're not standing on solid ground with it, then we're putting the village at risk.
I think we're trying really hard to make this, and then, not just enforceable, but also, can withstand legal challenges, and like, big thanks to Jen, especially for really thinking that through. And so it sounds like this is one of those places.
Yes. I agree. This is not a good place to be novel.
Okay, so do we want to go into the other difficult conversation, which is parking? It sounded like, remind me.
Why are we going
Where
into
you
parking
left
again?
Yeah, please.
We're gonna talk about parking forever. I thought that we settled this last meeting. Is this becoming reopened now? I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm feeling annoyed by it, because I feel like we've been literally talking about this for years. Like it's, you guys can open it back up again, but last meeting we talked about it.
So
If you
can you
want
remind us where you all landed in that session?
one spot per per permit, basically, which is lowering the threshold from the current law that's on the books, which is one spot per bedroom, which is similar to hotels. So it's a happy medium between the people who want no parking requirement and the people who feel like one spot per bedroom is too burdensome. And
Okay.
John is on the record from advising you guys earlier. I feel very strongly about it, that requiring parking is one of the best ways to limit the number of short-term rentals in a village like ours. And it's also one of the largest areas where people are going to have an impact on their neighbors in a small village like ours, where parking is a premium. Parking is a public resource. The people who pay to live here and who are residents here and who have their mothers visiting or whatever should have priority on the parking on your street. And if it's filled up by someone running a business and you don't have as much parking left on your street, it's not fair. That's my opinion. I'm going to be quiet now because it's, obviously this is your discussion, but
It's okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that we're going in the direction that you all were intending in that conversation. You, just to be clear, it was one spot on the parcel, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
one off-street spot on the parcel. And we talked, there was talk about allowing someone to apply to show that they have off-street parking. For example, if they rented off-street parking somewhere else, they would be able to prove that they have an off-street spot that's not on their property. And that was a discussion that was had. There aren't that's like very few and far between in the village,
Yeah.
those situations, so.
Okay, so I've changed my thinking on this from our last conversation, and it was, something was bothering me about it, and we started the short-term rental conversation 2 years ago before the parking plan was put into place. We put a parking plan into place that protects resident parking. If you don't have a permit, you can't park on the street. So, you know, there's lots of visitors and they can park in some places, but they can't park on your street if they don't have a permit on those busy days. So we have a permit plan, or I mean, a program that addresses the parking shortage issues. And I hope that we continue to work with that and develop it and grow it. If short-term rentals suddenly became a problem Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday, you know, and like, there's not enough parking on my street Monday through Thursday, because there's 3 houses on my block that have short-term rentals, and sometimes they have, you know, 2 cars that are taking up street parking, then why wouldn't we just change the parking program to protect parking 7 days a week? You know, like, we have a piece of legislation that addresses parking. It drives me crazy when you try and address the same problem in other places. It's like, how about we just leave that there and keep working on that and improving it, and make this short-term rental thing something that anyone can apply for and work with and, you know, function with, so that we're not excluding people, we're not giving people a reason to exercise civil disobedience or whatever is going on right now, and that people can get on board and support this program and do it legally and get fire safety done, and the village can collect the funds to make sure that, like, we're covering tourism.
So you're advocating for, I think what you're advocating for is no reference to parking in the short-term rental code, but inside the resident parking permit areas, which is a limited portion of the village, have those properties comply with resident parking permits. But what about the areas of the village that are outside of the resident parking area? There's a lot of, there's 11 streets in there.
Yeah, I have a question about that, because one of the statistics that Greg brought up at the meeting 2 weeks ago was that you found 200 listings. And this would cap the listings at 40, the permits at 40. So are we having a giant parking problem now because of Airbnb's short-term rentals? Because it would be less with this program, because we're limiting the number of permits and rentals. So, but I'm not aware that we're having a problem now. I'm not sure what problem we aim to solve with the parking issue.
And it sounds like Tweeps, you were chair of the last session, because I was not here. It sounds like a majority of the board reached consensus related to one spot per permit.
Yeah, I mean, as I
It was a bare quorum.
yeah, that's how I understood it, but I also think that we were talking about you know, whether they could apply for a parking permit, like be part of the residential parking permit plan. That was something else that was discussed, and that I would not be for. But I think, you know, Aaron, your question is kind of an interesting one, but how could we possibly know, right? Because people are clearly running STRs unpermitted, so we wouldn't know about vehicle parking because we don't know who's staying where and when.
Except in the resident parking permit area on weekends.
Exactly. And I can say, you know, I mean, I have not done any analysis. I know what I see on my block, but I don't know who these vehicles are, and you know, I couldn't say whether those people were people who were staying in an STR nearby or not. I don't know.
I'm asking if people, go ahead.
Oh, just, so one difference, is that we are going to a hosted program, and so, I'm guessing that a lot of the STRs now are when the regular occupant doesn't live there, so they can park where the owner is parking. So you can imagine that this would, you know, this would expand the number of vehicles, because it would be while the owner is also there. But I think the implication of your suggestion is that then the SDR host would come to Village Hall, at least for the residential parking permit area. They come to Village Hall and ask for a pass.
No, I would say in this case, they should not be allowed to use it that way, because then they could be asking for passes for 365 days for their business. I mean, it's different than like having the babysitter come or the
Yeah.
maid come. I think in this case, you tell your guests, you can't park on this block these days of the week at these times. There are other places to park in the village. There's a municipal lot, there's a Metro North lot, there's these places you can go to park. And it's on the host, and that's
So
how
now you're leaving village employees to interrogate the residents about their visitor? Cause how do I differentiate as the village clerk between who's visiting a resident who lives in the resident parking zone and who's staying in an or who's hosting an STR and asking for a permit for their visitor?
So here's, I think that we have to just, we could debate and debate and debate. I think we have to just have a vote on this and move forward, because there are other elements of the code that we need to move on to. I'm gonna make a motion.
Colleen,
Shall I- Yeah,
Can I just point out before you have a vote that this is like having the parking requirement is, I think John can back me up, is a very common
yes,
part of STR
yes,
law. It
correct.
would be insane for our small village that has a premium on parking to like remove any requirement at all. That's my opinion. One, and two, it literally is, we may not have a problem now, but we're looking for when the fjord trail comes, and we're looking for 20 years from now when maybe we're not going to be here. We don't want to be hollowed out like all these small towns in Europe. We're trying to future proof for a problem. It may not be a big problem right now, except for on a few streets or something like that. But that's the intent behind having at least one spot. I mean, I wanted to have one per bedroom, just like hotels, but this seems to be like a middle of the road, middle of the
Compromise.
way compromise. And
Yeah.
that's my point.
I agree. And so what I would like to do now is record our vote on this position within the chapter, this item within the chapter, so that we can resolve it, move forward with drafting it, and move on to other issues. So I would make a motion to require one parking spot per parcel for all properties operating as a short-term rental unit.
Off-site,
Off-street parking, on-site, off-street parking space. Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Okay, so Tweets, what did you vote?
I said aye, sorry.
Okay, so passes 4-1. Okay, thank you. Okay, seems like one of the big outstanding questions from last time was accessory dwelling units. How are we doing on time? I can't see the
It's 8:20.
8:20. So do we want to say till 8:45? Because this could go on. We're not gonna be done with this tonight. Do you want to pick a time to be done?
8:45,
Yeah.
did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds okay.
Okay. So, yeah, accessory dwelling units was another outstanding discussion, correct? Chiefs is nodding yes. Okay, so, the question is whether to allow accessory buildings to be used as short-term units. This is not an apartment. As I understand it, we're talking about not an apartment in a contiguous building. We're talking about like over a garage or.
So can
carriage
I,
house.
can I just,
Go
I'll
ahead.
just summarize the current code, the current STR law prohibits STRs in accessory structures is the language, accessory structures.
Mhm.
Since the time that that law went on the books, the zoning chapter 134 changed to allow in some cases legal accessory dwelling units under certain circumstances. So the question was, does that change what we want to consider for STR, basically?
Well,
Um,
the legislative intent of that change was to allow more long-term rental housing. And, sort of the granny flat. The legislative intent of the zoning change was not short-term rentals. So that's the discussion before us now.
Correct. And I'll just share or reshare that the ad hoc committee recommended that you continue to prohibit short-term rentals and accessory structures. This was again before the ADU law went into effect, but it's the same for the same. I mean, the ADUs are even worse because yeah, it would be taking off long-term rentals off the market or whatever you want to call it. Would be reducing, wouldn't be protective of how the kind of housing that we want to protect in the village. The accessory structure issue was the committee felt, this is not me, but the committee was an issue because most accessory structures in the village are within on property lines, basically. And some of them, a lot of them are farther away from the main dwelling unit and closer to a neighbor than they are to the main dwelling unit. And so it just seemed like it would it would be pushing a burden off onto neighbors more likely than a burden being, traffic and people being, there maybe right next to your yard or something like that. And in a situation where the main person who was there that was hosting the STR might feasibly be located farther away, farther out of earshot than another person that isn't hosting a STR. Am I making sense? The idea was it seemed like a can of worms to allow it in accessory structures. And so it was almost unanimous on the committee that they felt like we should still prohibit it. So that's my summary, just to bring you up to date.
So can I make sure I understand something? I don't know if it's you or John. What are, you're talking specifically about separate structures. What about apartments within a contiguous structure? A house has an apartment on the back side.
That was not, in the current law, that's not addressed in the accessory structure language. I think that's more addressed in the multifamily, that, et cetera. As long, if it's a separate unit within the main building, but it's not a multifamily house, you mean?
No. So say, I have a house that's 3 stories and I live on the second and third and I rent out the first floor as an STR. It's all a single house, but I rent out single house with an apartment in it and I rent out that apartment. John, how that
Attached, so you're distinguishing between attached and
attached and detached?
detached accessory dwellings.
I'm asking, can we distinguish between, or should we be distinguishing between?
That's up to you. So under the current code, it just says an accessory building.
Right.
So if you're an attached, I
Make
guess
it
that would still be permitted.
I'm not advocating for one or the other. I just want to make sure that I understand that we're not talking about, that we are not talking about 2 different things. So am I correct that the question then, the outstanding question then is units, this structure, accessory structures, not integral attached.
I guess you guys should clarify that. So
That's what I'm trying to summarize with Jen. That's what I heard the committee recommending. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yes, but that's only because when the committee was doing their work, there was no such thing as an accessory dwelling unit, like,
Yes.
and I mean, I'm just, this is just conjecture, I guess, but I don't think anybody had a problem with people who have another, you know, apartment within their house. I mean, that's how most people who run STRs, that's what they do. They have it some in a basement or in a bedroom. So
Just trying to be clear. Aaron, did you have?
Yeah, so I'm cross-referencing the different chapters, 134 and 100, and John, maybe there's a style question for you, but I would expect us to cross-reference definitions. And because the definitions aren't exactly alike.
Correct.
Problems.
That's what we're working on right now, though.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the reasons that spurred this change, because
Yeah,
the STR law was passed back in 2021. Then we redid the rezoning in 2023. I think we were trying to do the STR at the same time, but it became just too much. So we put that on the back burner. But yes, you're absolutely right. The
right.
definitions should be lined up, even if it's separate chapters. I just think it makes it better, and there might even be a reference. Well,
Yeah,
so there are definitions within the STR law itself. So, I mean, it's not that, it's not the end of the world that they don't line up with the zoning code, but yes, I think that needs to be done though.
Well, the goal here, just to be clear for a second, the goal is that in doing this work, we're working on concordance with 134. And that if there are changes that are needed in either this one or 134 to bring either in, we do them at the same time or one after the other. Because there are other things that need to be cleaned up in the
Right.
zoning code anyway, which we knew there would be. So we could do that as one legislative.
I understand that.
Okay.
My question is a little bit more literal though. Why don't we have a definition that says as defined in chapter 134? So we literally
Oh,
point to the Croft reference, so it's not copies, so it makes our life a lot easier in the future, somebody's future life easier. So maybe it won't be ours. But at this rate, we're revising chapter 134 every year.
no, I'm not. John,
There's a proposal.
how frequently do you see that happening?
There might be certain definitions that you may want to refer to 134, but I think there might be other definitions that are probably not defined in 134. So you'd have to do it a case by case basis, depending on the definition.
Yeah, okay, but
I
you
don't
could
need to
do
take us
it.
down that road. I was mostly curious.
But what Aaron is proposing is acceptable to do for those where it makes sense and there is cross-reference. Yes, okay. All
I
right,
mentioned one thing on back to the an accessory dwelling that is whatever accessory unit that's inside of the building.
Mhm.
We want to encourage ADUs in the village to provide more housing. And so we have established a 134 expedited review for the establishment of those.
Mhm.
I think what we don't want is some kind of expedited review that would allow for that kind of expansion that then is used for ADUs. So it would be, does that make sense? Like, I think we've allowed for a good pathway to
For rental
develop
housing, for straight rental housing.
for rental housing, but then we want to make sure that it's not instead used for purpose
That's
other
my
than that.
concern.
And so it would be helpful to hear from the planning board and ZBA chairs, perhaps, if they have I think especially Jesse, just because he knows both of them actually know it really well, from development, if that's a concern that they share and if we need to kind of close the loop on it.
I guess, if I think all the way back to when I first started working on short-term rentals, there was the idea that what about someone who has like an office in their garage or their carriage house? So it's not a full apartment. It's like it has maybe a bathroom and like a coffee maker, but it's not like a full kitchenette. It's not like apartment worthy. Do we exclude those people or that situation? And I mean, like, I'm not trying to make it more dicey and harder to like differentiate between one approval and the other, but in that situation, I don't see why it would be a problem, because it wouldn't be taking a real apartment off the market, it would just be taking a bedroom.
But I think it gets to, what Jen was saying is that those are often on the edges of properties. It gets to some of the other impacts to neighbors that they were trying to address,
Right,
right? That it's like people living in accessory buildings where people wouldn't normally live.
right.
My greatest concern is preserving regular, full, long-term rental housing. And this is, I don't know how you would fairly make a distinction between an accessory unit within a structure and an accessory structure itself on its own. And how that, I'm asking the attorney a question. Hang on a second, please. If you could fairly distinguish between those two under the law. And in terms, in the same way that there were questions about access with the shared driveway, are we running into the same sort of problem with differentiating within a structure or an accessory structure?
Well, it sounds like the difference is if it's an accessory structure within, which is attached,
Accessory unit, yeah,
there's less impacts because it's within the main house.
right.
As opposed to if it's detached, then theoretically it's close to the property line. But you have to remember that accessory dwelling unit that's detached could have somebody living in there 365 days a year, so I think you have to understand that. I mean, they're businesses, but they're operating technically as single family homes. So whether somebody's there a few weekends a month or a year, or there 365 days, I mean, it's still an accessory, small, probably 1 bedroom dwelling unit.
I think my concern is less about, I mean, I hear that Laura is concerned about impacts. I am super concerned about preserving long-term rentals. And I feel like it's a slippery slope. But I don't know how one could fairly and lawfully differentiate an internal, right, an attached unit from a detached. I don't see how we're not in the same spot.
Yeah, I just wonder if, like, when I did research on this in the past, it was all about whether or not it has a full kitchen or not. So if it's just like, somebody's basement apartment might just have a bedroom and a bathroom and like a microwave, right? So that's not somewhere like you would rent out, and you're not building a kitchen for your short-term rental or for.
But I'm not talking about those cases. I'm talking about places that have kitchens, that are habitable
But maybe we
spaces.
could make that be the differentiator if it's in
I see what you're saying.
auxiliary building or whatever.
Then you just take out the kitchen.
Can I read the definition from the zoning code, because it's
Go ahead.
pretty clear here. So it's, first of all, it's not called an accessory dwelling unit, it's called an accessory apartment. A separate dwelling unit, that's where the confusion comes, with its own cooking, sanitary, and sleeping facilities, and occupied by no more than one family for living purposes. The lot on which an accessory apartment is located must be the principal domicile of the lot's record owner of title. An accessory apartment is incidental and subordinate to a one-family dwelling located on the same lot, and may be located in the principal building on the lot or in an accessory building.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that is, yeah.
Okay. So it could be either, but we could say, we're gonna define a separate accessory apartment or something that's part of this definition, but then more specific.
Give it a new name.
Or just treat it the same way.
I mean, 134 talks, there are ways that it already addresses ones that are separate buildings, so I don't think that would be hard to do.
So Laura, it sounds like you were advocating for turning this question for some advisory opinion.
I think my concern is more about the development of new ADUs. a lot of what's written here is about the development of new ones and that we're trying to encourage
Especially
more
with
of them. And so I think my concern would be if that were used to develop more short-term rentals through like the existing mechanism.
You can only get 40 permits, so. Right? Like you wouldn't make more if we have 40 permits already applied for. Like, I don't know, unless people are turning their garage into a one-time permit use for 2 weeks a year, which then really doesn't impact the neighbors all that much.
You're saying because there aren't that many, there won't be an incentive to use this toward development of new ones.
That's, yeah,
Generally, you make more money on SDRs than on long-term rentals.
Well, and then, yeah. Right, but that's not great it's not great for housing stock and it's not great for neighborhoods. All right, so it's 9:35. 8:35. The military clock, can we just have a normal clock? 8:35.
This is normal in the rest of the world.
This is true. I just want an American clock. All right, so. I feel, myself, I feel undecided on this point right in the moment. I feel like I need to sit with it. I don't know how others are feeling.
I guess I'd like legal advice on like if and how we can differentiate between a unit in the house and out of the house. I mean, because John made a really good point saying that like, well, you could have people living there all year round and it still might annoy the neighbors. So why is that any different?
First. Well, the potential for it
It's
being
different because you know your neighbor in that instance. Nobody is against having a neighbor. The whole point, I mean, that's why everybody is not everybody, but a lot of the village is so, or was a long time ago, so up in arms about short-term rentals, is nobody wants to live next to people coming and going that they don't know or whatever all the time. But if you have a neighbor, that's different. Everybody likes to have a neighbor. That's what the code is trying to encourage the residential use of the area, right? And so make it look more, that's all, sorry, that's my contribution or whatever to that.
Thank you.
There's also a permit for new ADUs, there's a permitting process with a public like comment period.
That's true.
And so if there were a new one proposed in an outside building, there would be an opportunity for the neighbors to talk about the impact to them and for the planning board to consider that before giving a permit. And the way that we are proposing to issue the STRs, there isn't that kind of sort of process, like public input process. I think that that's a distinction as well.
But if we were to define an accessory apartment that's detached, right? And say, hey, we want these accessory apartments to be used for long-term rental, so the way to do that would be to say no permits for detached accessory apartments.
Yeah.
Just be very clear, right?
Which brings me back to the question that I began with, to John, which was, how is that different than just saying no to shared driveways? I don't understand how that's a different.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like I said, you could argue that if it's attached, it's part of the principal residence, it's aesthetically unnoticeable, it's gonna be theoretically smaller, could be, in most cases, smaller than a detached accessory dwelling, and it's going to be further away from the property line. I mean, so I think you could make the argument that there is a distinction.
I mean, that would be the direction that seems reasonable to me, is making that distinction between accessory and integral. I realize it's not the term that's in the code, but you understand what I'm saying.
I mean, the section of the zoning code on accessory apartments does describe the intent of the section very clearly, and I think persuasively, and, you know, I think anything we do with SDRs against that weakens that argument, right? So we don't have similar shared driveway code language anywhere, I think. right? So I don't think it's related necessarily. Um,
Well, it sounds like from what John's saying, sort of in keeping with what you're saying, that how that is crafted in terms of the language makes a difference.
Like maybe you can allow, detached accessory if they meet certain setbacks or something like that, you know, that could be a way to still allow detached accessory structures to have STRs. But if you have certain setbacks that are more than your typical accessory structure, maybe then you could permit them.
So I think that in terms of drafting, we need to have a direction. For getting to it,
Yeah.
something we can take to public hearing.
Want to point out also that one of the examples that was given before was, you know, what if the host was in the accessory apartment and the main house was
Which
rented,
is not
right?
unusual.
It's not sort of the same effect, but our proposal-ish isn't dealing with that. So what's the difference between the two?
But in the definition that you just read, it emphasizes that the primary domicile is the main house, right? And so we could have something very similar here to say that the short-term rental.
I think this-
that
oops, sorry.
that you can't do that switch in the same way.
So how about this? I think this will be a lot easier to discuss when we have a draft to work from. For me, it would be easier to have a draft to work from. Jen, is that something that you are willing to draft, or you would like one of us to draft?
What do you mean?
A way to manage the language around accessory structures.
Jen just wants to feel better.
Jen just wants to feel better. I mean, we all need to end in 3 minutes so that Jen. can-
Yeah, I can look at that. I can look at that. So you're talking about just a few sentences, basically.
Mhm.
But what is the consensus of the board on it? Like, you mean in order to further discussion of it, let's have something we can
I think
talk
we need
about.
to have something to work from to come to
Okay, got it.
consensus. But it sounds like what I think I'm hearing is okay in a main, if it's part of a structure, an existing structure, not okay if it's in an accessory structure
That is
Yeah.
separate from.
that is separate from. Is that where we're landing roughly for
I
drafting
think that was the
purposes?
majority of there.
Okay.
Devil's in the detail.
Devil's in the details, it always is.
So it's basically an edit to section 100-4 M, which currently states an accessory building may not be used as an STR. So we're changing that. You want language to
I'm just
incorporate.
wanting to be more specific because I can think of, you can think of lots of examples around the village where there are accessory units that are part of the main building, not a separate building. And if, in doing this, we're saying they can't be well, no, it is just building. Maybe I'm
Very
making
clear,
a
yeah.
problem
I
that's
mean-
not, doesn't exist.
If.
I mean,
Accessory
I think
building is
I think
defined.
most people assumed that those would be short-term rentals, like in our fair game. This was just, I thought the original one said accessory structure, but the one that this has gotten changed since I turned it in. So, but
Yeah,
like,
so-
that's a
Yeah,
question
yeah.
for John. Like, if it just says an accessory structure may not be used for short-term rentals, doesn't that mean that it sort of just leaves it open for the other things to be used?
Yeah, I
Well,
agree.
And under F, if a building contains multiple residences, only one residence in the building shall be permitted to obtain an STR rental permit. Is the legislative intent of that to say, if you have an apartment in your house, you cannot have, you can rent one of those units only?
That means the apartment can also have an STR.
Right, the main house can't, but if I have an apartment, I can live in the primary portion, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record here.
I took that as if there are say if there are two buildings, only one of them could have a
So this-
room that's
so-
being rented out. So like if you had another building with a tenant, they couldn't also have an STR within theirs.
So it allows one unit in the building to be a short-term rental. It does not have to be.
Right, I think there's only one short-term rental per property, so if you have a two-family, you can't rent both of them out for short-term rentals. And probably the same, even if it's a single family with a attached accessory dwelling, you could only rent out one of them.
That two-family brings up a tricky issue, right? How, it's just the first, how will we, how will we distinguish, how will we select between the two,
Why do we have?
the
to?
duplex?
Why do we
Well,
have?
John was just saying that that's the meaning of that part of the legislation. Am I making sense? If that is saying that there can only be one per property, and you have a duplex that's on one parcel, then say the people that live in both of the sides of the duplex come in, it's gonna be the one who got to the door first? Is that how we would, that's, I think, the current plan.
Well, there would be only one,
You're talking
unless
about
it's,
between the two, the renters?
unless it's a condo or an HOA, there should only be one owner of the property, unless it's a condo or some type of townhouse.
Like Campbell has shared.
Or, I mean, I have neighbors on Garden that are duplex or more.
I'm gonna suggest
But you're right, you're right that they're rentals. No, you're right that they're rentals.
Yeah, and so the property owner probably has to sign the application, so.
Yep, okay, okay. Good point.
47.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just taking a note.
I think there's people here who might want to give public comment, which I would support if the board does.
Well, you need to make a motion.
I'll make a
It's not on the
motion
agenda.
to allow public comment,
On what?
on short-term rentals,
Okay, on an agenda item.
on an agenda item.
Yeah, I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone in the room who wants to make a comment?
Oh, a quick one.
Okay.
Thank you, first of all, for taking the time and going through this in such detail. I know it's very contentious and challenging, but I would just highlight a couple things. So one is the most binding of all the things, and I'm a little late to this, so maybe you've discussed this at length, but the most binding is hosted or owner occupied, that concept, because it addresses all the rest. Like shared parking, if the person that lives in the house is there, then the neighbor can at least have a conversation and try and hash out what the issues are. Also, in terms of rental stock, what you don't want is investors from out of town buying buildings and putting them into short-term rentals and not being around. So if it's owner occupied, that's no longer available. I think there was one other thing I was thinking about earlier. What was it? In any case, that to me would be the most important of all the points you're trying to make, because it doesn't address the multi-unit and things like that necessarily, but as long as the owner is there, then it solves a lot of these problems.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I know who you are, but I forgot to ask you your name and your address for the record.
Whit Pensky, Parrot Street.
Nice to see you at a village board meeting.
Well,
Any other comment on agenda items?
Anybody on the screen?
Yeah, hi, it's Peter Farrell, 191 Main Street. Thank you, everybody, for your work on the committee here and the process. I just have a question. On the committee, how many of the members are active Airbnb owners in the village of Cold Spring?
So the committee is no longer meeting. They met until a draft was produced. And Jen, can you remind us the number?
Yeah, how many are active Airbnb
Yep.
owners?
About half. I need to look back at the list to remember, but I think a half or slightly more than half.
They were owners, or what you mentioned, they were operators. So there's a big difference in that makeup. And I'm curious if there are any owners on the committee that were representing
Owners of what? Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Airbnb.
Are you trying to distinguish between owners and agents, Pete?
No, owners as in, I'm an owner of my Airbnb. I live in the house. I
Yeah,
run the Airbnb. So an active Airbnb owner would be somebody in the Village of Cold Spring who you're representing that owns the Airbnb.
there was the owners who were on, that's who they were.
I've spoken to several committee members that are not active owners on Airbnb, but yet they're on the committee and they questioned their selection. So that's why I'm asking the question, because I don't know if you have any active Airbnb owners on the committee. So I'm asking, how many do you have?
You know what, Peter? Honestly, because the committee hasn't convened in quite some time, because they delivered a draft and then it turned over to us because we're the legislative body. I honestly have to go back and look to even remember who all was on the list, but Jen is representing to you that roughly half the membership operated short-term rentals.
Yeah, they operated and some were out of state, so they weren't active. They're not
No, there was
stakeholders.
no one on that
Hold
committee.
on,
They
hold
weren't
on. Yeah, I can
stakeholders in
answer.
the
Wait, I can
Airbnb.
answer this. Nobody was out of state. Everybody was a resident of the
A resident.
village. And
No, they
it
weren't.
just,
They weren't
Peter,
Airbnb
they were
hosts.
just like you. They're the people that I'm talking about were just like you on they're not, I don't understand the question exactly or what you're trying to get at. Maybe you should just say what you mean to say.
No, what I mean, Jen, is if they're an Airbnb owner like myself, like Phil Heffernan, like John Lane, they are owners of their Airbnb and they operate that Airbnb. An operator could be operating it for somebody else that's not necessarily the owner. That doesn't mean they're the Airbnb owner. So there's a big difference in that stakeholder kind of.
So you mean someone who
Yeah,
operates?
we had at
They
least three
operate?
people that were owners and one person that had been an owner or and is a, do you mean like someone who's like a host?
Yes,
Professional?
no, somebody who's an active owner. Active meaning they're actually doing it and have been doing it during the committee
Yeah,
and even
it's
at this
rough.
point.
So the answer to your question is it was roughly at that time. I don't know if they're still operating their Airbnbs out of their house, but we had about half of the people and I can, at next meeting, I can give you a more, or I can post
Yeah,
it later.
and that's all I'm asking, Jen. I'm not looking at, there's no other agenda
I
on
think
that one. I
I
just want
think
to
the
know how many
confusion was
were,
just owner,
how
operator.
many,
I didn't understand what you meant, so thank you
yeah,
for.
are they owners and operators and they did in the Village of
We've heard,
Cold Spring?
we've heard
That's
you,
it.
Pete. So we will provide the list of names of people who are on the committee, okay? And then you'll know who it was, and we can mark. We have certainly
Yeah,
back in the
no, and
minutes
that's
who is
important
in what
because,
role.
yeah,
Okay,
and
so
it's,
thank you.
no, I just wanted to follow up on that though,
Oh,
Kathleen.
Peter, we're at
Because it's
20,
important on
we're
the,
at
it's
5
important
of
on the
9 here
adoption of what
now.
you're trying to do. Because we support what you're trying to do, but we need to have, I think, there's a buy-in. And if there's nobody on that committee that's representing the
Here,
owners,
let me
there's
try
not
to
gonna
say
be
it
any
again.
buy-in.
And can you mute him, please? The committee is no longer meeting. The committee made its recommendations. This conversation now sits with the legislative body. There is no more committee meeting. They made their recommendations and we're going from there. Anyone else who'd like to comment? Okay, with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do you have to approve minute? Oh, no, sorry.
We did minutes already.
Okay.
And before we do adjourn, if everybody could give Greg a sense of holiday schedule and travel schedule over the next couple months, so we can know when we have quorum and don't have quorum, that'd be great. I don't know how far ahead you know.
Yeah, email it to me, please.
Yeah, email's good. Okay, so I've made a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Bye, Kate.